Imagine scrolling through your phone late at night, post after post, video after video. Everyone thinks they know the truth about Chris Watts. Some call him a perfect husband who suddenly snapped. Others blame his mistress. Some even twist Shanann's personality into a reason for her own death. Social media is full of myths, recycled until repetition feels like fact. But myths are dangerous. They comfort us with simple explanations while blinding us to the harder truths. Tonight, we take apart 10 of the most persistent myths about Chris, what's myths that dishonor Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, and myths that cloud our understanding of how family annihilation really happens. This is Dark Truth, True Crime Stories. If you believe victims deserve truth more than rumor, subscribe now and join us. Because in this space, we cut through noise and face the facts. Myth 1. Chris Watts was the perfect husband and father. When people first saw the Watts family in photographs, they saw smiles, vacations, birthday candles, a mother glowing with pride, and a father standing quietly, arms around his little girls. It looked like a picture-perfect life. On Shanann's Facebook page, video after video showed Chris playing with Bella and Celeste, teasing Shanann in her kitchen, smiling for selfies. Friends wrote comments like couple goals and he's the best dad. Neighbors described him as polite, helpful, the quiet guy next door. In those first hours after the family disappeared, television anchors even call him a devoted husband. The image of perfection was everywhere. But the image was never the full story. Behind the polished pictures, Shanann was carrying private worries. In texts recovered by investigators, she confided to friends that Chris had grown distant. She wrote, "I don't know how you fell out of love with me so fast." After a business trip in July 2018, she told her best friend that Chris had not touched her in weeks. She suggested counseling. He refused. He began working out obsessively, counting calories and spending long hours on his phone. What looked like self-improvement was really a man preparing for a new life. By then, Chris was already having an affair with a co-worker, Nichol Kessinger. Phone logs showed late-night conversations that stretched for hours. Restaurant bills revealed dinners for two. He Googled romantic vacation spots, downloaded new playlists, and began imagining a future without his family. The myth of the perfect husband survives because it comforts us. It is easier to believe that Chris transformed suddenly, like a switch flipped overnight, than to accept that a seemingly ordinary father was hiding betrayal for months. It is easier to believe social media posts reflect reality than to accept they are only fragments. Shanann's positivity was not a lie. It was how she motivated herself, how she sold her brand, and how she chose to present her world. But it was not the whole picture. Psychologists call this the Facebook fallacy. People assume curated images of the truth, when in fact they are snapshots, moments chosen for light, not for shadow. Forensic experts remind us that family annihilators often wear masks of normalcy. They attend soccer games, they smile in photographs, they stand at backyard barbecues. Neighbors say, "He seems so normal," until the mask falls away. The persistence of the perfect husband myth says as much about us as it does about Chris. We want to believe that danger is obvious, that evil announces itself in advance. Because if the warning signs are invisible, if ordinary husbands can become killers, then safety itself feels like an illusion. That is why people cling to this story, to protect their own sense of security. But the Discovery Files left no doubt. Chris Watts was not perfect. He was a man leading two lives, one smiling for camera, the other secretly erasing the family in that photograph. To call him perfect is not just inaccurate. It is an insult to Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, whose lives were cut short while he played the role of husband and father. This myth is not unique to Chris Watts. John List was described as a church-going accountant before he murdered his family and vanished for nearly 2 decades. Neil Entwistle was considered a doting new father before he killed his wife and infant daughter. Again and again, neighbors say they were perfect, and again, the evidence tells another story. So we ask, how many perfect photographs on social media today hide unspoken tension, financial pressure, or private despair? The truth is not that every smiling family harbors darkness, but that appearances are never enough. Chris Watts was not a perfect husband or father. He was capable of affection, yes, but also of deception and betrayal. He was not a man who simply broke. He was a man who made choices that destroyed his family. The lesson is this: perfection is illusion, and illusions can blind us to the truth. To honor Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, we must strip away the myth and face the reality. Because only in truth can we hope to recognize the warning signs before another family is lost. Myth 2. Chris just snapped overnight. From the moment the Watts case made national headlines, a simple story took hold. People said Chris must have just snapped. Neighbors whispered it. Commenters repeated it. Even early media reports framed the murders as a result of a sudden eruption of rage. It is a story people want to believe that a seemingly ordinary man simply lost control in one horrific moment. But the evidence shows otherwise. Chris Watts did not snap overnight. What happened in Frederick, Colorado, was not the product of a single argument or a sudden burst of anger. It was a culmination of weeks, even months, of detachment, planning, and betrayal. Why does a snap narrative spread so easily? Because it offers comfort. If Chris killed his wife and children in a sudden, uncontrollable fit, then his crime becomes an anomaly, a lightning bolt no one could predict. It reassures the public that he wasn't an ordinary man hiding darkness, but rather someone who flipped in an instant. The story keeps evil at a distance. But the truth is far more chilling. Chris was making choices long before August 13th, 2018. Choices that reveal calculation, not chaos. The myth traces back to Chris's own words. In his first confession, he claimed that after asking Shanann for a separation, she strangled the children, and in a rage, he strangled her in return. This story was designed to make him look like a grieving father who simply reacted. He wanted to cast himself as a man who snapped. But police weren't convinced. There was no evidence Shanann harmed the girls. There was no forensic support for his claim. His story didn't add up, and as investigators pushed, his master control began to slip. In reality, the warning signs were everywhere. Shanann's text showed she was terrified of his distance. She begged him to try counseling, but he refused. Phone records revealed long, late-night calls to Nichol Kessinger. Restaurant receipts proved he was spending money on secret dinners. And perhaps most damning of all, the night before Shanann came home, Chris programmed his truck's GPS to the very oil site where he would later hide their bodies. That wasn't chaos. That was planning. Forensic psychologists warn that the snap narrative rarely explains family annihilation. These crimes are often preceded by weeks or months of detachment, by fantasies rehearsed in silence, by small choices that build into catastrophe. Chris wasn't a man who lost control in a single instant. He was a man who carefully stripped away his ties to his family until he decided they were obstacles to his new life. Still, the myth of suddenness persists because it matches the mask Chris wore. To neighbors, he was still the helpful dad. To Shanann, he was still showing up in family photos. To the outside world, he still looked ordinary. The mask made his crime feel like a shockwave. But when you strip the mask away, you see the storm had been building silently for weeks. Chris is not unique. John List methodically prepared before killing his entire family, even canceling the milk delivery and stopping the mail. Neighbors insisted it was out of the blue. Neil Entwistle appeared to be a loving father until investigators uncovered his secret searches for escorts and handguns. Again and again, families and friends described the killer as suddenly snapping. But the files always show something more deliberate beneath the surface. Believing the snap myth is dangerous because it blinds us to reality. If we convince ourselves that these murders are random lightning strikes, we ignore the slow warnings: emotional withdrawal, secret double lives, financial pressure, fantasies of escape. These signs don't always mean violence will happen, but ignoring them, because we believe in sudden snaps, leaves us unprepared. Chris Watts did not snap overnight. He detached, he lied, he planned. He drove to an oil site already chosen. He carried his daughters alive in his truck. He executed a decision, not an impulse. The myth of the sudden snap comforts us, but it is a dangerous comfort because the truth is harder. Sometimes evil doesn't explode. Sometimes it whispers, step by step, until the mask comes off and the storm breaks. Nichol Kessinger masterminded the murders. When the truth about Chris Watts came out, social media needed a villain to match the scale of the horror. Chris was already convicted, but for some people, that wasn't enough. Rumors began to spread. It must have been Nichol Kessinger, the woman he was having an affair with. She must have been the one pulling the strings, whispering in his ear, pushing him toward murder. Entire forums and YouTube videos spun theories that Nichol planned it all, that Chris was just her puppet. It's a compelling story. The other woman, the temptress, the mastermind. But it's also a myth, one that doesn't hold up when you look at the evidence. The story of Nichol's supposed influence began simply because of who she was in the case. She was the affair. She was the secret life Chris was chasing. To many, that was motive enough. And because she disappeared from public view after testifying, the mystery around her grew. Silence, in the age of endless speculation, becomes suspicious. The internet filled in the blanks with its own imagination. Threads popped up claiming she was with Chris on the night of the murders. Others pointed to her Google search history, noting she looked up Amber Fry's Scott Peterson's mistress, supposedly because she was planning her own public role. Some even suggested law enforcement protected her because she was secretly involved. But here is what the records actually show. Nichol was interviewed for hours by investigators. She voluntarily handed over her phone, her texts, her call logs, her internet history. Nothing revealed any involvement in planning or committing the crime. Yes, her internet history did include searches for Amber Fry, but the timing is critical. Those searches happened after the murders became public. She wasn't planning her role, she was realizing in shock that she had become the mistress in a case that would dominate headlines. And as for the night of the murders, her phone data and testimony placed her nowhere near the Watts home. Chris was alone. So why does the myth survive? Because it's easier for people to believe Chris was manipulated than to accept that he made these choices on his own. The femme fatale story has existed for centuries. A dangerous woman lures a man into ruin. It shifts blame away from the man and paints him as a weak pawn. But that story erases Chris's agency. He was the one lying, programming his GPS, wrapping Shanann's body in a sheet, and driving his daughters to their deaths. No one else turned that key. Criminologists caution against scapegoating mistresses in family annihilation cases. Affairs may be catalysts, but they are not instigators. The decision to kill comes from the perpetrator alone. Nichol Kessinger became part of Chris's fantasy life, but she did not design the reality of murder. The danger of this myth is that it distracts from the real signs: financial pressure, emotional withdrawal, secrecy, fantasy escapes. By blaming Nichol, people ignore the fact that Chris made conscious, deliberate choices long before she entered his life. Nichol herself became collateral damage. Her name was dragged across headlines, her privacy destroyed, her safety threatened. She was not on trial, yet in the public's imagination, she became a villain. But the truth is simple. She was not the mastermind. Chris Watts didn't need anyone's help to kill his family. He did it himself. Myth 4, the oil field was random. When people learned that Chris Watts hid his wife and daughters at a remote oil site, many assumed it was a frantic, last-minute decision. The story goes that he panicked after the murders, drove around aimlessly, and stumbled upon a quiet place to hide the evidence. On forums and in comments, you'll still see this repeated. He didn't plan it, he just panicked. But the records tell another story. The site wasn't random. It was deliberate. Chris worked for Anadarko Petroleum, and the site he chose wasn't just any field, it was part of his daily route. He knew it well. He knew the schedule, the equipment, the remoteness. He knew the oil tanks. They were large enough to conceal the bodies of his daughters. It was familiar ground, and familiarity meant control. Investigators discovered that on August 12th, the night before Shanann returned from her trip, Chris quietly programmed his truck's GPS to that very location. He didn't decide in panic. He chose his destination before the crime even happened. That detail changes everything. If the disposal site was chosen in advance, then the murders were not impulsive. They weren't the result of a single fight gone wrong. They were calculated. Chris had already pictured what he would do, where he would go, and how he would try to erase his family's existence. Detectives said it plainly. You don't just drive to an oil site by chance. He knew exactly where he was going. Forensic experts agree that when killers use places tied to their jobs, it signals preparation. They rely on spaces they understand, where they believe they can move without suspicion. For Chris, the oil site wasn't random, it was his territory. So why does the myth survive? Because randomness makes the crime feel less cold-blooded. If it was a random field, then maybe it was panic. Maybe he didn't mean to go so far. But if it was deliberate, then we face a colder truth. He imagined every step before Sean and even walked through the door that night. Randomness gives him chaos. Planning gives him responsibility. The oil field wasn't random. It was chosen, programmed, prepared. And when Chris drove there with the bodies of his wife and daughters, he was following a path he had already set in his mind. Believing it was random is comforting, but comfort is not truth. The truth is far more chilling. He didn't just kill his family. He knew exactly where he would leave them before the crime even began. Myth 5. The children never saw it coming. Among the most heartbreaking myths is the belief that Bella and Celeste were asleep, unaware, and spared from fear. People cling to this story because it provides a sliver of comfort. It's easier to imagine the girls never knowing, never feeling terror, than to face the reality of what may have happened. Early reports even suggested Chris killed Shanann while the girls slept and then carried them unconscious to his truck. Social media repeated it like a shield. At least they didn't know. But the truth, as revealed later, is far more devastating. In his 2019 prison interview, Chris admitted that Bella was awake after Shanann's murder. He carried his daughters, alive, into his truck. He drove them for nearly an hour to the oil site. Picture that, a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old sitting in the back seat of their father's work truck in the dark, without their mother, sensing something was terribly wrong. And then the final confirmation, the most haunting detail of all. According to Chris, when he turned on Bella, she pleaded, "Daddy, no." Those 2 words shattered the myth completely. Bella knew. She understood enough to realize that the man she trusted most had become the source of danger. Why do people resist this truth? Because it's unbearable. To accept that the girls knew is to accept their suffering. To accept their suffering is to carry a grief almost too heavy to hold. So people cling to the myth, repeating, "At least they didn't know," because it softens the horror. But illusions don't honor the truth. Child psychologists explain that even young children can sense danger through tone, silence, and atmosphere. They may not understand the full reality, but they feel when something is wrong. The ride, the oil site, the absence of their mother, the quiet of the night, all of it would have signaled fear. Experts in family annihilation also confirm that children are often the last to realize what is happening, and tragically, their trust in their parent makes them more vulnerable. They go willingly, believing they are safe, until it is too late. Believing the girls never knew risks, minimizing Chris's cruelty. He didn't only kill them, he forced them to live through fear, confusion, and betrayal in their final hour. Understanding that reality deepens the gravity of his crime. He wasn't a man who lost it. He was calm enough to drive with his daughters alive in the back seat, fully aware of what he intended to do. The myth says Bella and Celeste never knew. The truth says otherwise. Bella spoke words that should never have to come from a child's mouth. "Daddy, no." Those words echo forever as proof that innocence was shattered in the most horrifying way. Believing they were spared might ease our hearts, but honoring their memory means facing the truth, however painful it is. They were not spared. They were betrayed by the one person they trusted most. And that is a reality no myth should ever erase. Myth 6. The confession told the whole story. When Chris Watts finally confessed, many believed the case was closed. After days of lies, after interviews where he pleaded for his family's return, he broke down and admitted what he had done. For the public, it felt like closure. A villain had confessed, and the truth had finally been spoken. But confessions do not always equal truth. In Chris's case, every version of his story left contradictions, gaps, and evasions. The myth that his confession told the whole story is just that, a myth. His first confession was the most self-serving. He told investigators that Shanann strangled the children in a fit of rage, and he killed her in retaliation. He wanted to frame himself as a grieving father avenging his daughters. But the evidence didn't match. There were no signs Shanann harmed the girls. There was no forensic support for his claim. His story was a desperate attempt to make himself look less monstrous. Later, after failing a polygraph, Chris admitted to killing Shanann himself. But even then, he minimized. He said it wasn't planned, just a sudden act. He avoided details about the children, speaking vaguely, leaving out the horror of what really happened. His words were carefully chosen, designed to soften the blow. For many, this was enough. He had admitted guilt, and that seemed like the end of the story. But the inconsistencies remained. Why had he programmed his GPS the night before? Why had he begun withdrawing weeks earlier? Why had he prepared for life without his family? Months later, in a prison interview, Chris revealed more. He admitted Shanann never harmed the children. He confessed that Belle was awake and pleaded, "Daddy, no." It was a chilling revelation, one that deepened the tragedy. But even then, he stopped short of explaining his true motives. Psychologists call this selective confession. Offenders reveal fragments of truth, but hold back the darkest parts, protecting their self-image or keeping control of the narrative. The public still clings to the idea that a confession told the full story because people crave finality. Uncertainty is exhausting, but the truth is murkier. His words shifted depending on the audience, first investigators, then his parents, then the world. Confessions can be performances as much as revelations. In Chris's case, they were fragments, not the whole. To this day, the full truth of why he did what he did remains elusive, tangled in lies and omissions. Believing his confession was complete is comforting, but it's not accurate. Closure is not the same as truth, and in this case, the truth may never be fully known. Myth 7. Shanann was controlling and drove him away. Another myth that refuses to die is the idea that Shanann herself was to blame. In interviews and online forums, people called her controlling, demanding, too ambitious, too outspoken. The story says her personality drove Chris away, that she pushed him to the edge and made him snap. This is not just a myth. It is victim blaming of the cruelest kind. The roots of this narrative go back to Chris's own family. His mother, Cindy Watts, often described Shanann as bossy or difficult. Clips of her comments replayed on television, fueling the idea that Shanann was a problem. Online, people seize on Shanann's Thrive videos, her leadership in her business, her direct way of speaking. Instead of seeing confidence, they labeled it control. In a culture where women are punished for ambition, Shanann became an easy target, but her private messages tell a different story. Shanann wrote to friends about her efforts to save her marriage. She said she felt Chris slipping away, that he was cold, distant, and detached. She begged him to go to counseling. She tried to fix what he refused to acknowledge. Her positivity online wasn't control, it was hope. She wanted to hold her family together, while her husband built a secret life with someone else. Why do people cling to this myth? Because it makes the crime feel explainable. If Shanann was difficult, then Chris's actions have a cause and effect logic, however twisted. It shifts blame away from him, allowing people to believe he was provoked. Victim blaming also creates distance. If Shanann's personality caused her death, then ordinary families are safe. But if Chris killed simply because he wanted freedom, then anyone could be at risk. That fear is harder to live with. Domestic violence experts warn against this exact thinking. Abusers often describe their partners as controlling to excuse their actions, but violence is not caused by the victim's personality. It is caused by the perpetrator's choices. By repeating this myth, people echo Chris's own attempt to shift blame. The danger is that it dishonors Shanann. It suggests she caused her own death, when the truth is that she was a victim of betrayal and violence. She was not controlling. She was strong, ambitious, and determined. She worked tirelessly to provide for her daughters, to keep her marriage alive, to build a future for her family. Blaming her twists her love and effort into flaws, and that is an injustice on top of the tragedy. Chris Watts alone made the decision to kill his family. The responsibility is his and his alone. To honor Shanann, we must reject a lie that shifts blame onto her. She didn't drive him away. He walked away and then he killed. Myth 8. Chris was a model dad until the affair. One of the most widespread myths is that Chris Watts was a wonderful father until he met Nichol Kessinger. The story goes that he adored Bella and Celeste, that he was deeply involved in their lives, and that only after starting the affair did everything change. In this version, the affair corrupted him, transforming a loving dad into a killer. It's easy to see why people believe this. Shanann's Facebook is filled with videos of Chris playing with the girls, kissing them, holding them close. Neighbors describe him as attentive and patient. To outsiders, he looked like the model modern father, quiet, steady, involved. Compared to older generations, where men were often distant, Chris seemed hands-on. Shanann herself often praised him for being a good dad. These public moments were real, but they weren't the whole story. By the summer of 2018, long before the murders, Shanann was already worried about his parenting. In messages to friends, she said Chris seemed emotionally absent. He was less affectionate with her and less engaged with the children. She wondered if it was stress or if her pregnancy had changed his feelings. But in reality, Chris had already begun to detach. The affair wasn't the cause of his withdrawal. It was a symptom of it. He was building a fantasy life without the responsibilities of fatherhood. The myth persists because it preserves the illusion that fathers who kill their children must have been corrupted by something external. If the affair is the cause, then the tragedy feels preventable. But the truth is harder. Chris could hold his daughters lovingly one day and imagine killing them the next. He could play the role of father convincingly while planning their deaths. That duality is far scarier than the idea of a sudden transformation. Experts in family annihilation explain that many offenders appear affectionate toward their children until the end. The affection isn't always fake, it coexists with resentment. They may still love their children in moments, but they also see them as obstacles to their fantasy of freedom. For Chris, the affair didn't change him. It revealed who he already was. Believing he was a model dad until Nichol entered the picture is comforting, but it's a myth. He was never the perfect father people imagined. He was capable of tenderness, yes, but also of secrecy, betrayal, and ultimately violence. The affair did not create that duality. It exposed it. Myth 9, we fully understand the case. The Watts case has been dissected more than almost any other crime in recent history. There are documentaries, podcasts, YouTube videos, and thousands of pages of discovery files made public. People spend hours combing through police interviews, analyzing body cam footage, and debating every word Chris ever spoke. With all of that information, it's tempting to believe the case is solved, that every detail has been explained. But the truth is, we don't fully understand it. The illusion of completeness is powerful. On paper, it looks like the story's over. Chris confessed, he was convicted, and the evidence is public. But knowing what happened is not the same as knowing why. Motive is slippery. Psychology is murky. Even with all the files, there are gaps we may never fill. Why that exact night? Why that exact method? Why could he smile in photographs one day and strangle his wife the next? Chris himself has given multiple explanations. He said he snapped. He said Shanann didn't fight back. He admitted Bella pleaded with him. His stories shift depending on who is listening. The truth is that he has never offered a consistent motive. Was it desperation to be with Nichol? Was it financial stress? Was it fantasy of freedom? Likely, it was a mixture of all these things. But no single confession ties it neatly together. Criminal psychologists caution that family annihilation often defies easy answers. These men are not serial killers with a pattern. They are not robbers or gang members. They are husbands and fathers who decide, in a moment or after weeks of planning, to erase their families. Even they may not fully understand why they do it. The human mind craves closure. We want to point to one cause, one reason, and say, that's it. Social media thrives on this need. Posts go viral claiming it was Shanann's success or Nichol's influence or money or mental illness. Each claim pretends to complete the puzzle. But in reality, the puzzle is incomplete, and it always will be. Believing we fully understand a case is comforting, but it blinds us to reality. The truth is messy, uncertain, uncomfortable. Accepting that discomfort honors the victims more than false certainty ever could, because their story is bigger than the words of the man who silenced them. Myth 10. Talking about the case glorifies Chris Watts. Every time a documentary is released, or a podcast uploads a new episode, or a YouTube channel breaks down the case, a debate resurfaces. People say talking about Chris Watts glorifies him, that repeating his name gives him the attention he wants. It is a valid concern. True crime can easily become spectacle. But to say that every discussion glorifies Chris is a myth, because when the story is told responsibly, with the victims at the center, talking about the case is not glorification. It is remembrance, education, and warning. The myth grew out of frustration with early media coverage. News outlets plastered Chris's face everywhere, replaying his porch interviews and courtroom appearances, dissecting his demeanor. It made him look like the star of the story, while Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico became background characters. The public noticed and rightly asked, why are we giving him airtime? Why are we making him famous? But the problem wasn't that the case was being discussed. The problem was how it was being framed. Silence doesn't erase him. In fact, silence can be more dangerous. If we don't talk about the case, myths go unchallenged. False narratives spread unchecked. Victim blaming flourishes. And the lessons that could save lives are lost. When we examine Chris's lies, his double life, his detachment, his fantasies, we are not celebrating him. We are studying the anatomy of a crime so others can recognize red flags before tragedy strikes again. Responsible storytelling means centering the victims. Shanann's devotion, her strength, her fight for her family. Bella's courage. Celeste's joy. Nico's life that never began. These are the names that deserve to be remembered. Every time we speak their names, every time we strip away myths that dishonor them, we shift the focus back to where it belongs. The danger lies not in speaking, but in sensationalizing. If we obsess over Chris's prison life, his looks, or his excuses, then yes, attention drifts toward him. But if we confront his lies, expose his choices, and return dignity to the victims, then speaking becomes a form of resistance. Talking about Chris Watts responsibly does not glorify him. It dismantles his lies. It denies him control of the story. And most importantly, it keeps Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico alive in memory not as shadows of his crime, but as a light he could not destroy. Final reflection. The Watts case is one of the most analyzed crimes of our time. But beneath all the headlines, all the theories, all the myths, lies a devastating truth. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico were taken from this world by the very man who should have protected them. Myths may comfort us, but they do not honor the victims. Truth does. And by dismantling these myths, we not only honor Shanann and her children, we learn to see the signs, to question appearances, and to confront the uncomfortable realities of human behavior. If you found value in this deep dive, please subscribe to Dark Truth, True Crime Stories. Share this video so the myths don't drown out the truth. Because justice is not only about verdicts, it is about memory. Keeping their story clear, unclouded, and real. Until next time, stay questioning, stay thoughtful, and keep searching for the truth in the darkness.